The cold came fast that October. It had a bite to it, the kind that gets in your bones and stays there. The air smelled of wet asphalt and rotting leaves, the sweet, sad smell of autumn giving up. And in the middle of my backyard, my swimming pool was a slash of defiant, brilliant turquoise. It wasn't just paint. It was my own formula, a polymer coating I'd been developing for months, a flexible, resilient seal designed to fix aging city pipes without having to dig up half the town. The pool was just my test canvas, my proof of concept. Funny how a little bit of color can cause so much trouble. If you're watching Karenology, you probably know it's never just about the color, it's about control. The first sign of that trouble wasn't a letter or a passive-aggressive note. It was the wail of a siren, growing louder until it stopped right in front of my house. Red and blue lights pulsed against my neighbor's windows, painting the trees in frantic, silent flashes. I walked out front just as a fire truck, the big ladder engine, hissed to a stop. But it wasn't a firefighter who hopped out of the passenger side. It was Frank. Frank was 55, with a soft belly and a hard smile. He was a contractor who'd somehow gotten himself onto the board of our homeowners association. You know the type. The guy who quotes Robert's Rules of Order at a backyard barbecue. He walked onto my lawn like he owned it, followed by the local fire chief, a man named Henderson who looked deeply uncomfortable to be there. Frank didn't even say hello. He just pointed a thick finger toward my backyard. "Alex, what in God's name is that?" I crossed my arms. The cold was starting to seep through my jacket. "It's a pool, Frank. They're popular in the suburbs." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't get smart. That color. The charter has a list of approved materials and colors. That electric blue isn't on it. This is now an unpermitted chemical site." He said, "chemical site," like I was brewing poison back there. He turned to the chief. "Henderson, you agree this is a potential hazard, right?" Henderson shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "Well, Frank, it's non-standard." "Exactly," Frank boomed. "Non-standard. We're shutting off your water until you can provide a full lab analysis and get it certified. Public safety." He loved that phrase. It was his hammer, and everything looked like a nail. Before I could argue, Henderson was at the water main by my driveway, pulling a red tag from his pocket. I felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't about safety. This was a power play. Have you ever had that feeling? That sudden gut-wrenching moment you realize you're completely powerless, and the person holding the strings is enjoying it? If you get what I mean, hit that like button. It's a lonely feeling. I saw my old manometer lying on the porch railing where I'd left it. It's a simple pressure gauge, but it's my history. The deep scratches on its brass casing are a reminder of the day it saved my life on a job. Its needle dropping just seconds before a pipeline ruptured. It's my symbol anchor, a reminder of what's real versus what's just noise. In the flashing lights of the fire truck, it seemed to be mocking me. Frank walked over, his own symbol on display. He tapped the large gold gilt ring on his finger against my fence post, a little tick he had whenever he was laying down the law. Rules are rules, Alex. You of all people, an engineer, should understand that. I didn't say a word. I just watched as Chief Henderson looped the thick plastic tag around my water valve and cinched it tight. The click of the lock was a small, sharp sound in the night. It felt as loud as a gunshot. The fire truck rumbled away, its siren silent now, plunging my street back into an ordinary, quiet darkness. All that was left was the cold, and that single spot of angry red on my water pipe. It gleamed under the porch light, a tiny official declaration of war. That red tag on my water pipe glowed under the porch light all night. It was a little piece of plastic, but it felt like a shackle. The next morning, the silence in the house was the first thing I noticed. No hum of the water heater, no gurgle of pipes, just a dead quiet that felt heavy and expensive. I was making coffee with the last of the bottled water when I heard the metallic clatter of the mail slot. Let me tell you something about bad news. It never just trickles in. It comes in a flood. On the floor were 2 envelopes. One, thick and embossed with the Homeowners Association logo, felt heavy with malice. The other was from my mortgage company. My stomach tightened. You know that feeling, right? When you see an official-looking envelope you weren't expecting, and your brain immediately jumps to the worst possible conclusion. I opened the HOA's letter first. The words jumped off the page. Emergency services rendered. The bill was for $8,000 for a fire truck that did nothing but provide a stage for Frank's little power trip. $8,000. I laughed, but it was a dry, brittle sound. The second letter was worse. It was short, polite, and terrifying. The Homeowners Association had formally notified them of a material covenant violation on my property. That's bank speak for, you broke the rules you agreed to when we gave you the loan. The letter went on to say they were reviewing my account, which could lead to an immediate and substantial increase in my mortgage rate. They weren't just trying to drain my pool, they were trying to drain me, my finances, my home, everything. This was Frank's next move, escalating from a neighborhood squabble to a full-blown financial assault. The man wasn't just a bully, he was a shark, and he smelled blood. I spent the next hour on the community's online message board, trying to fight back with logic. I posted the chemical composition of my polymer, non-toxic, inert. I explained that the color was a harmless mineral reaction. It was like shouting into a hurricane. Frank had been busy. He'd posted a picture of my brilliant turquoise pool. Right next to it, he'd put a grainy, dramatic photo of a burst water main somewhere in another state, spewing brown water all over a flooded street. His caption read, "Experimental chemicals or safe infrastructure, you decide." The comments section was a cesspool, dozens of them, appearing in minutes. "My kids play on that street. Think of the property values. Thanks, Alex, for turning our neighborhood into your personal science fair." Some were obviously fake accounts, using the same stilted phrases. But others were from my neighbors, people I'd known for years. The fear was palpable. Frank wasn't just fighting me, he was expertly manipulating the whole community. I couldn't take it. I had to look him in the eye. I found him holding court at the local hardware store, standing by the plumbing aisle like it was his throne. I walked right up to him. "Frank, you and I need to talk. Now." He turned slowly, a smug little smile playing on his lips. He saw the anger in my eyes and loved it. "Alex, keeping busy? I hear you've got some plumbing issues." A couple of his buddies nearby chuckled. "This has to stop," I said, my voice low and tight. "The lies, the fake photos. This isn't about a pool color, and you know it." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're right. It's about a guy who thinks the rules don't apply to him. A guy who puts his little pet projects ahead of his neighbor's safety and their biggest investment. You're a liability, Alex." He tapped his gold ring on a metal shelf, a rhythmic tink, tink, tink. "And liabilities," he said, turning and walking away. "Get managed." I stood there in the aisle, smelling the metallic scent of new pipes and cutting oil. People were staring. I looked like the crazy guy yelling in a hardware store. He'd played me perfectly. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. He was isolating me, painting me as unhinged. It was the same tactic he'd use later, but I didn't see it then. What would you have done? Stood there and taken it? That evening, I sat by my dark, still pool. That beautiful turquoise color, the one that was supposed to be my comeback after my last project went south. It now looked like a monument to my own stupidity. The memory of my partner, Dave, after the pipeline accident years ago, his face pale in the hospital bed, flashed in my mind. A mistake I'd made, a microfracture I'd missed in a report, a life nearly lost. I couldn't afford another mistake, not now. I needed an ally, someone who understood pipes and pressure, someone who respected real work, not just rules on a piece of paper. And one name came to mind, Bob, an old-school plumber, a guy who'd been fixing this town's guts for 40 years. He was honest. He was respected. He would see the value in my polymer. He had to. I pulled out my phone and found his number. My thumb hovered over the screen, the little green call icon glowing like a beacon of hope. It felt like my last shot. I had no way of knowing I was about to walk straight into the next phase of Frank's game. That little green button on my phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I pressed it. The phone rang twice, then a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? Bob, it's Alex, your neighbor down on Elm Street." There was a pause. I could hear the clink of tools in the background. "Alex, the engineer, heard you're in a bit of a jam with the Homeowners Association." Of course he had. News like that travels faster than a winter cold in a small town. "You could say that," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Listen, Bob, I know you're the best plumber in 3 counties, the only one who still knows how to work with the old cast iron. I have something I need you to see. Something I think could change how we fix things around here. Another pause. My shop, 10 minutes. The line went dead. Bob's workshop was a cathedral of organized chaos. The air smelled of rust, WD-40, and 30 years of hard work. Old pipes were stacked like cordwood along one wall, and 1,000 different fittings sat in 1,000 little labeled drawers. Bob himself was exactly as I remembered him, lean, weathered, with hands that looked like they were carved from old oak. He wiped them on a greasy rag and motioned for me to come in. I laid it all out for him. I didn't give him the sales pitch. I gave him the science. I explained how the polymer worked, how it bonded with old, corroded metal, creating a seamless, flexible lining inside the pipe, a liquid bandage that was stronger than the original pipe itself. I showed him my stress test data, the pressure readings. He listened, nodding slowly, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He picked up the sample piece of pipe I brought, a rusty old length of cast iron I'd lined with the turquoise polymer. He turned it over and over, running a calloused thumb over the smooth, bright surface. "So, you're saying this stuff," he grunted, tapping the turquoise lining, "can save a pipe that's ready for the scrap heap?" "It can give it another 50 years of life, Bob. No digging up yards, no replacing entire systems. Just clean it out and pour it in." He squinted at me. "Frank's been pushing for a full replacement of the mains in Sector 4, says they're shot. It's $1 million job." "I know," I said, "and I think it's unnecessary." He was quiet for a long time, just staring at the piece of pipe in his hands. A small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. He gets it, I thought. He sees it. Finally, he looked up. "Leave this with me," he said. "I'll run my own tests. I'll give you an honest opinion." An honest opinion. That was all I wanted. I left his shop feeling lighter than I had in days. The call came 2 days later. The wait had been excruciating. I'd been checking the HOA message board obsessively. Frank was quiet, which was more unnerving than his usual blustering. "Alex, it's Bob." His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "I've got the report for you." "And?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Meet me at the diner, 15 minutes. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon. Bob was already in a booth, a stark white report lying on the table between us. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He just pushed the papers across the vinyl tabletop. I picked them up. The paper felt cheap, flimsy. I read the summary on the first page. Words jumped out at me. Unpredictable bonding with oxidized cast iron. Potential for flaking under high pressure. Not recommended for municipal use. It was a complete fabrication. A hatchet job. My data proved the exact opposite. I looked up, my voice barely a whisper. "Bob, what is this? This is wrong. You know this is wrong." For the first time, he met my gaze. His eyes were tired, defeated. He looked 100 years old. He sighed, a long, ragged breath. "Look, son," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes it's just easier to replace the whole thing than to try and patch it up." It was a line, a rehearsed hollow line, but the way he said it, it wasn't just about pipes. He was talking about himself, about the system. He was telling me he'd been broken. Have you ever put your faith in someone, your last real hope, only to have them look you in the eye and sell you out for their own survival? That's a kind of pain that leaves a permanent mark. I didn't say anything else. I just stood up, left the report on the table, and walked out into the cold. I knew with absolute certainty what that report was for. It wasn't for me. It was for Frank. It was the expert testimony he needed. I had just handed my enemy the sword he was going to use to execute me. As I reached my front door, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the Homeowners Association. The subject line read, "Urgent community meeting, proposed infrastructure levy." I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. Frank had his weapon, and he was about to use it on the whole neighborhood. The community meeting was held in the high school gymnasium. The place had that familiar smell of floor wax and teenage desperation. But that night, it was layered with something else. Fear. Cold, hard, financial fear. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile, buzzing glare over the rows of folding chairs packed with my neighbors. I stood in the back, leaning against the cold brick wall, feeling about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. Frank was in his element. He stood at a podium on the basketball court, under the hoop, looking like a coach about to announce the end of the world. He had a projector set up, and the first slide was a picture of a geyser of brown water erupting from a suburban lawn. It was the same fake picture from the message board, now blown up to 10 feet tall. "As friends, neighbors," he began, his voice oozing sincerity. "Our community is sitting on a time bomb. Our water mains are over 50 years old, corroded, unreliable." He clicked to the next slide. It was a single terrifying number. $1.2 million. That's what it will cost to replace the aging infrastructure in Sector 4, to secure our homes, to protect our property values. A low murmur went through the crowd. You could almost hear them doing the math in their heads. Frank let the number hang in the air for a moment before clicking again. The next slide read, "Proposed special assessment, $15,000 per household." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the gym. $15,000. For some people in that room, that was a year of college tuition. For others, it was their entire life savings. The fear in the room curdled into anger. "Now, I know that's a big number," Frank said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Believe me, the board has explored every option to avoid this. We even had our most trusted local expert, Bob, evaluate a so-called cheaper solution proposed by one of our residents." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I felt their stares like a physical weight. I didn't move. I just met their eyes, one by one. Frank held up a copy of Bob's report, the same one I'd left on the diner table. "Unfortunately," he said, shaking his head with theatrical sadness, "Bob's professional analysis, which you can all read for yourselves, concluded that this experimental fix is unpredictable and not recommended. It's a gamble we simply cannot afford to take with our homes." He had them, hook, line, and sinker. He'd created the crisis, offered the terrifyingly expensive solution, and preemptively discredited the only alternative. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I could feel my own failure burning in my chest. The memory of my past mistake, the accident that hurt my partner Dave, was a ghost at my shoulder. I had let it make me cautious, hesitant. I'd trusted Bob to see the truth because I was afraid to fight for it myself. And now, this was the result. Not just my own defeat, but a $15,000 bill for every one of my neighbors. After the meeting, the gym emptied out quickly. People avoided my gaze, hurrying past as if I were contagious. I was left standing alone in the vast, empty space. The smell of floor wax seemed stronger now, cleaner, as if trying to erase the dirty business that had just happened. I walked home under a sky that was a flat, starless gray. The houses were dark, but I could feel the tension behind the drawn curtains. Phones would be ringing. Husbands and wives would be having hushed, worried conversations over their kitchen tables. And it was my fault. When I got to my house, I saw a single figure sitting on my porch steps. It was a young woman, huddled in a thick coat against the cold. As I got closer, I recognized her. It was Bob's daughter, Sarah. Her face was pale, and there were tear tracks glistening on her cheeks in the dim porch light. She stood up as I approached, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Mr. Henderson told me I could find you here," she whispered, her voice trembling. I have to talk to you. It's about my dad." My blood ran cold. I thought I knew what she was going to say, that she was here to tell me to leave her father alone, to stop causing trouble. I braced myself for another attack. "He's in the hospital," she said, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down her face. "He had a heart attack. This afternoon." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. All the anger I felt toward Bob vanished, replaced by a hollow, aching dread. "But before the ambulance came," she choked out, looking at me with wide, desperate eyes, "he made me promise. He made me promise to tell you something." She stood there on my porch, a silhouette against the weak glow of the street lamp, and the story she told me dismantled everything I thought I knew. The air was so cold, my breath plumed in front of my face, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was a slow-burning rage taking root in the pit of my stomach. "Frank threatened him," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the dead leaves skittering across the driveway. "My dad's company. It's small. We get almost all our big jobs as a subcontractor for Frank's firm. Frank told him if he didn't write that report, if he didn't say your polymer was junk, he'd be blacklisted. Not just from his jobs, from every major contractor in the state. He said he'd ruin him." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Bob's tired eyes in the diner, his hollow words about it being easier to replace things. He wasn't talking about pipes. He was talking about his life's work. Frank hadn't just bought his silence. He'd held a gun to the head of his legacy. Have you ever seen a good person forced to do a bad thing? It's one of the ugliest sights in the world. And in that moment, my fight with Frank became something much more personal. Before he collapsed, Sarah continued, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, he kept saying he was sorry, and he told me to give you this. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn, spiral-bound notebook. It was a standard-issue work log, the kind every tradesman carries. It's his private job journal, she said. He told me to look at the entries for the last 6 months, specifically the jobs for Frank. I took the notebook. The cover was soft with use, stained with grease and coffee. It felt heavier than it should. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice thick. "Go be with your dad. I'll handle this." She nodded, gave me a watery, grateful smile, and disappeared into the night. I went inside, the dead silence of the house pressing in on me. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd read the bank's threatening letter, and opened Bob's journal. The pages smelled of pencil lead and old paper. His handwriting was a tight, precise script, the careful lettering of a man who measured everything twice. And there it was, spelled out in undeniable detail. Entry after entry documented jobs under Frank's supervision. I saw notes about substandard copper fittings being used on new installations in Sector 2. I read about pressure fluctuations in Sector 3 that Bob had flagged, only to be told by Frank to sign off on it anyway. It was a 6-month chronicle of deliberate, systematic sabotage. Frank wasn't just planning to profit from replacing old pipes. He was actively causing the problems himself. He was using cheap materials on repairs, creating weak points that were guaranteed to fail, all to build his case for the $1 million replacement project. The burst pipes weren't a matter of if, but when. He was manufacturing a crisis that he would then get paid handsomely to solve. My turquoise pool hadn't started this war. It had just accidentally stumbled onto Frank's battlefield, threatening to expose his entire operation by offering a real solution instead of a manufactured one. A cold calm settled over me. This wasn't just about my reputation or my money anymore. It was about Bob, lying in a hospital bed because he was squeezed between his conscience and his livelihood. It was about every family in my neighborhood being forced to pay for a lie. My past failure, the one that hurt my partner Dave, had made me cautious. It had made me seek validation from others, like Bob. But this was different. This wasn't an engineering problem. This was a war against a con man. I closed the journal. The house was still quiet, but it wasn't a dead silence anymore. It was the quiet of a machine that's about to be switched on. I walked over to the window and looked out at my pool. The turquoise water was dark under the night sky, almost black. It looked like a secret. My phone buzzed on the counter. A news alert. Water main break reported on Oak Avenue. Oak Avenue, Sector 4, right on cue. Frank wasn't just planning his disaster. He was scheduling it. I picked up my old, scratched manometer from the mantelpiece. The brass was cold in my hand. For years, its existence had been a reminder of a failure, a symbol of a risk I hadn't seen. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like a promise. A promise that this time, I wouldn't just measure the pressure, I would apply it. The final Homeowners Association budget meeting was in 2 days. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. I had the truth in a little spiral notebook, but I knew that paper alone wouldn't be enough. Frank had built his lies on fear. I had to tear them down with something harder, something real. I had to give them a live demonstration. The next 48 hours were a blur. The news about the water main break on Oak Avenue spread like a virus. Frank was all over the community forums, a digital Paul Revere, warning that this was just the beginning. "This is what I was trying to tell you all," he wrote. "The system is collapsing. We need to approve the special assessment now, before we have a real catastrophe on our hands." He was a master, turning his own act of sabotage into his greatest piece of evidence. The fear was so thick you could taste it. I didn't waste my time arguing with shadows on the internet. I had work to do. I spent the first day in my garage, which I converted into a makeshift testing lab. The place smelled of ozone from the welder and the sharp chemical tang of my polymer resin. I felt a focus I hadn't felt in years, the old instincts kicking in. The ghost of my past failure, of Dave in that hospital bed, was still there, but it wasn't a weight anymore. It was a whetstone, sharpening my resolve. Using a salvage section of old, corroded pipe from Bob's workshop, I meticulously applied my turquoise polymer, creating a perfectly sealed inner lining. It was the same process I'd used on my pool. Then I went to the hardware store, the same one where Frank had publicly humiliated me. I walked straight to the plumbing aisle and bought a brand new section of the exact type of pipe Frank's company used for their repairs. It was cheaper, thinner walled, and I knew it was the same junk he'd been forcing Bob to install. The final piece of my plan was the most important. I called the one person at the bank who had always treated me like a human being, not just an account number, a junior loan officer named Peterson. I explained to him that there was more to the story of the material covenant violation and the impending $15,000 levy. I didn't give him all the details. I just told him that as a major financial stakeholder in the community, the bank might want to have a representative present at the final budget meeting. Just to observe, I said, to ensure the community's investment is being managed responsibly. It was a long shot, but the threat of $1 million project built on a foundation of potential fraud was enough. He promised he'd be there. The night of the meeting, I loaded my 2 pieces of pipe into the back of my truck. Alongside them, I placed a small portable hydraulic press and my old, reliable manometer, my symbol anchor, my truth teller. The metal was cold to the touch. The budget committee meeting was a smaller affair, held in the sterile, soulless conference room at the local library. The air was thick with tension. There were only about 20 people there: Frank, the HOA board, a few concerned residents, and, sitting silently in the back, Peterson from the bank, his presence a quiet bomb in the room. Frank didn't look happy to see him. Frank launched right into his pitch, his voice ringing with false urgency. He pointed to the burst pipe on Oak Avenue as his Exhibit A. "We were lucky this time," he said, his face a mask of grave concern. "Next time, it could be a dozen homes flooded. We cannot afford to wait. I move that we approve the $1.2 million infrastructure replacement and enact the special assessment, effective immediately." The board members, all in Frank's pocket, nodded in solemn agreement. The chairman was about to call the vote. It was now or never. "Just one moment," I said, stepping forward from the back of the room. My voice cut through the silence. Every head turned. Frank's face darkened. "Before you vote to spend over $1 million of our money," I said, "I think you should see exactly what you're paying for." I walked to the front of the room and placed my 2 sections of pipe on the table. One was the old rusty piece with its bright turquoise lining. The other was the new shiny piece. "On the one hand," I said, tapping the new pipe, "we have the solution Frank is offering you, brand new." Then I tapped the old one. "And on the other, we have a 50-year-old pipe that's been repaired with the very experimental chemical that started this whole mess." I could see the confusion on their faces. Peterson, the banker, leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. I looked directly at Frank. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "You're an engineer, Alex," he sneered. "What's your point?" "My point," I said, as I wheeled the hydraulic press to the front of the room, "is that in my line of work, we don't trust words. We trust pressure." It was time for the live demonstration. It was time to see what would break first, the pipes or Frank's web of lies. I set up the hydraulic press right there on the library's linoleum floor. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the metallic clicks as I secured the first piece of pipe, Frank's new, shiny pipe, into the clamps. I attached the hose and glanced at my old manometer, its familiar, scratched face ready to tell the story. "This is a standard pressure test," I announced, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Municipal water systems operate at around 50 to 80 pounds per square inch, or PSI. A good pipe should be able to handle several times that." I looked over at Frank. A thin sheen of sweat was glistening on his forehead. He knew what was coming. I started pumping the handle of the press. The needle on the manometer began to climb. 40 PSI, 80, 100. The pipe began to creak, a low groaning sound. 120 PSI, I called out. Then it happened. With a sharp, ugly crack, the pipe split open. A hairline fracture raced down its length, and a few drops of residual water wept onto the floor. It failed. It failed miserably. A nervous murmur rippled through the room. Peterson, the banker, was now on the edge of his seat, his pen frozen above his notepad. I didn't say a word. I just calmly unhooked the broken pipe and placed it on the table. Then I clamped in my repaired pipe, the old rusty one with the turquoise heart. "Now for the 50-year-old liability," I said, making eye contact with every board member. I started pumping the handle again. The needle climbed past 80, past 120. The pipe didn't make a sound. 200 psi, 300. The only sound was the steady rhythmic hiss of the hydraulic pump. 400 psi, 500. The needle quivered at the top of the gauge, but the pipe held. It held without a single tremor. I stopped pumping. 500 psi, I said into the stunned silence. And it's not even breaking a sweat. I let that sink in. Then I pulled out Bob's journal. "This isn't just about a strong polymer," I said, my voice cold and clear. "It's about why your new pipes are so weak." I opened the journal. This is the work log of Bob, a man every one of you trusts, a man who is currently in a hospital bed with a heart condition brought on by the stress of being threatened by Frank. He was forced to lie, to sign a false report, because Frank promised to destroy his business if he didn't. I read the entries aloud, the dates, the locations, the notes about substandard fittings and ignored warnings. With every word, another layer of Frank's respectable facade was stripped away. I wasn't just showing them a failed pipe, I was showing them a failed man, a con artist who endangered the entire community for profit. When I finished, no one spoke. The truth was just hanging there in the air, undeniable and ugly. Peterson, the banker, slowly closed his notepad. He stood up. "On behalf of the bank," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "we are freezing all credit lines to the Homeowners Association, pending a full independent fraud investigation into this matter." That was the kill shot. Frank's face went white. His $1 million project, his entire house of cards, had just evaporated. The board members looked at him not with loyalty, but with the dawning horror of people who have just realized they are tied to a sinking ship. The meeting fell apart. In the end, there was no vote. There was just the quiet, devastating collapse of Frank's little empire. He was ruined. The Homeowners Association was in chaos, and the county was launching an investigation that would likely end with criminal charges. A few days later, I stood by Bob's hospital bed. He was pale, but his eyes were clear for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, Alex," he whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Bob," I told him. "You told the truth when it mattered." The community asked me to oversee the repairs for the entire district. It was a big, lucrative contract. My chance to finally build something lasting, something to erase the memory of my past failure. It was my ethical fork in the road, and I thought about my polymer, my brilliant turquoise secret. I could have become the new Frank, holding a monopoly on the only real solution. But instead, I made a different choice. I published the formula for my polymer online, under an open source license for anyone to use. My only condition was that any municipality using it had to implement a mandatory public stress test protocol, just like the one I'd performed in that library conference room. I didn't want to own a solution. I wanted to build a new standard of trust. So, did I win? I suppose so. Frank was gone, and the neighborhood was safe. But my victory had a price. I gave away the invention that could have made me rich. My pool, the one that started it all, is no longer a unique marvel. It's just the first of many. I sacrificed my secret for the public good. And as I stand here, looking at that calm turquoise water, I feel the weight of that choice. I won the war, but I lost my own private miracle. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. What do you think? Drop a comment below. I'm curious to know what you would have done.